Hey, welcome. This is the best ever brass instrument makers podcast. Hi, I'm Jake. I'll be going there alone today. Unfortunately, I fell sick this week. After a few days of wondering what the fuck is going on, I lost my sense of taste and decided to go get myself tested and came back positive for COVID. So I am stuck at home in quarantine for the next 10 to 2 weeks, maybe. Who knows? But anyway, that gives me enough time to sit into a podcast. I miss my poor colleague Matthias, but it is what it is. And yeah, it sucks. But anyway, I'm still alive, good health, all that, knock on wood. But I am losing my voice, so we'll see how far I can go here. Anyway, welcome to the podcast. Also, due to me being at home, I'm not going to take any questions. I'm just going to talk about one instrument and one instrument maker. We got a request from the States. Someone mentioned that we don't talk about euphoniums very much. I mean, dude, we're in Germany. I mean, not many people play euphonium here, but okay. By chance, we had a bit of well, at least for in Germany, a rare Dutch-made instrument from the 1920s that came in. It was a 3-valve euphonium. You could call it a baritone or a sax horn or whatever you like, but in this case I would definitely call it a euphonium. It had a 32 cm bell and a 15 millimeter bore, so quite large, piston valves. In my book, that makes it pretty close to being a euphonium, or is a euphonium. And this instrument was made by the Dutch company Kessels of Tilburg. This is not a name that springs to mind very often. However, most of you out there who are euphonium players or tuba players, when you think of Dutch instrument makers, you probably think of the modern company Adams, but over 100 years ago, there were a number of Dutch companies that made brass instruments and also woodwind instruments, along with everything else. Like the rest of Europe, they had their own industrial revolution, and they also were big suppliers to military wind bands and orchestras and so on. So they have their own history and culture of that. So anyway, there is a maker which was previously unknown to me, called Kessels of Tilburg. This particular instrument, like I said, was a 3-valve instrument. It is nickel plated, which probably indicates a military use. Had a relatively simple engraving, or maybe a budget instrument. However, having said that, played quite not bad, I would have to say. It was definitely along the lines of almost I would say professional instrument, like up there with the Bessons from the 1920s as well. So this particular instrument from Kessels, this euphonium, I would say when you compare it to other European-made instruments from the time, so let's see the contemporaries of Mahillon in Belgium or Besson in France, in Paris, I would say Kessels is a lot cruder. If I was going to say on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being, I don't know, my 1970s Hirschbrenner C tuba from a colleague, probably one of the nicest put together horns I've ever seen, or a 1 being speck on the ass of humanity, usually some of the Chinese-made instruments being a 1. I would probably put it more around a 4 or a 5. It's crude. It definitely has slight bits in common with a Russian tractor, St. Petersburg, Leningrad tubas, but still in some sense better than those. But it honestly played quite well, so I was a bit surprised by this. So I thought, okay, fine. The name got me curious, so I started to look into the name Kessels. The internet, being your good friend, revealed a bit more information than I realized, although I have to say most of the information is either on Hornucopia or on various Dutch websites. And if you have trouble reading any of the Dutch websites, if you're a German speaker, just take one shot of schnapps, and that should allow you to read most Dutch. If you're an English speaker, then I'd recommend 4 or 5 shots of schnapps, and then you should be able to read it pretty well, at least 3 or 4 beers at the best. So the history of Kessels is a bit of a strange one. There's some small questions here and there that I don't quite understand just from reading online. Probably it's going to require a bit more research, but here's a good shot at it. Okay, the founder of the company, Matthias Joseph Hubert Kessels, short for Mathieu, was born on the 1st of March in 1858 in a town called Heerlen. And if I'm mispronouncing these Dutch names, I apologize. It's completely intentional. I have no fucking idea how to speak Dutch. Although, like I said, after 1 or 2 shots of schnapps, I can kind of understand it. And I'm going to do my best to translate here. So he went into business with his brother Peter Kessels in 1880. They started a music publishing house in sheet music. And then they quickly branched out to dealing in music instruments. So they would deal in instruments from other companies. Who they were, I don't know. I assume they're contemporaries, either in Holland or, naturally their neighbors, the Belgians or the French or even the Germans. The brother Peter in 1884 becomes the director of an orchestra, a conductor. And so Matthias goes it alone from 1884. In 1886, he moves to Tilburg, which is the name on the instrument itself, which is a city in the far west of Holland. In Tilburg, he started a workshop repairing brass instruments. And if I'm translating this right, he initially repaired brass wind instruments in his, quote, Dutch factory of musical instruments. Okay. By 1890, there is mention of him making completely new instruments in a factory building, their own dedicated building. And then by 1897, they're on the industry street, which means they had a large production factory. He also continued his music printing press business. He started another one of those from 1897 in Tilburg. Okay, yada, yada, yada. It won a lot of awards. They made every kind of music instrument, so on, so on. Now, what's strange is if you go to Hornucopia and you click on Kessels of Tilburg for Netherlands, it's another name for Holland or the Dutch, there's a lot more info on here, which is kind of interesting. So 1887, this Matthias Kessel starts his repair shop. In 1889, he starts manufacturing brass instruments under the name Niederländische Fabrik van Muziekinstrumenten. 1894, he acquires another company. That's not quite clear, the Van Osch company. Somehow they also make instruments. He partners up with another colleague in 1903. In 1907, a company from England orders 900 pianos from them. Okay, so this is a brass maker, but someone orders pianos from them. Looking into it, their factory had expanded by then to make all instruments, including pianos. 1 year later, they finished the pianos, but it turns out that the British company that ordered them couldn't pay for it. So Kessels then broke the partnership, the deal off with them, and due to money issues, he finds a new financial partner. He changes the name of the factory to the MV Kessels Königliche Niederländische Fabrik for music instruments, but I guess that means that he has some kind of royal stamp that he's received, but again, they still run into money troubles, but somehow they managed to scrape along. He gets official permission in 1913 to use the royal name in the factory. Okay, so that means in 1908 then he just called himself a royal delivery thing, but yeah, I guess nobody called him out on his bullshit, and then at some point he gets the official name. In 1914, the name is officially changed to the Royal Nederland Fabrik for Music Instruments, owned by Mr. M.J.H. Kessels. The director of the bank that's supporting him, Mr. Van Omeren, wants to add a second director to the company because they don't trust him. Kessels refuses this. He is then fired from his own company. The bank puts someone named William Koenig in charge of the company, but right at this point, the First World War breaks out, and they no longer have Kessels himself, who is running the company. The firm struggles quite badly. So Kessels, like any good entrepreneur, says, suck my balls. He moves right across the street and starts a brand new factory. I'm trying to think of another contemporary, but I guess Adolf Sachs is somewhere along these lines. The original company folds by 1924. They tried to create another company, so on, whatever. Somehow what's confusing is that both factories kind of have similar names. So there's like two factories with different guys running it that have different, whatever. I don't know. Anyway, this gets very confusing. You can read through this. But somehow there is some kind of legal strife or fight between Kessels and the original factory that he was thrown out of. And by 1931, he's forced to change his name, and he drops the royal part. He calls it the National Fabrik of Music Instruments. In 1932, he dies. His oldest son, Matthew Jr., takes over the factory. Nobody really knows what happens after that. He moved the business to a different city, while another son named Paul takes over the publishing company of the business, which we know closes in 1958. And then there's the third son, Hendrik, who starts another factory, a third factory. There's Dutch people just starting factories everywhere. This is started in a different city called The Hague, run by Hendricks, who's the third son of Kessels. And eventually this goes bankrupt and closes down. Apparently, according to the text here, it failed not because of poor craftsmanship, but rather poor business practices. So awkward. So that's kind of a bit of a checkered history of the Kessels firm. So it's a bit messy. If you look through their catalogs, which are all very nicely on Hornucopia, they have a number of catalogs from 1899, 1915, and 1922. The catalogs show quite a wide variety of instruments, but nothing that I would call very radical. They seem to be copies of French-made instruments or Belgian ones. I would suspect a lot of those instruments are similar to Mahion's or to Besson's or another French company. Like, for example, they follow the French maker's tradition. The instrument that I have in the workshop at the moment that I call euphonium, in this catalog it is referred to as a tuba, and the instruments what we would refer today as a tuba are referred to as bombardons. Okay, so they're using a French system or Belgian system of what they call their instruments. Makes sense, being neighbors and so on. So that's a bit of the history of Kessels and a little bit about the instrument itself. However, the story doesn't end there. In the 21st century, looking forward if I can find it here for you. I'll make sure I attach links to all this so you can read through it yourself. The city decided to use an old, I believe, a textile mill, and they were gifted or donated a number of tooling from the original factory. I don't know how to say, like all the lathe spinning equipment, some of the valve making equipment, a lot of hammers, a lot of all sorts of valve production tools and so on. So basically bits and pieces from the brass making factory and the woodwind making factory. And they started a museum. This museum was opened a few years ago. It is open to the public. I'll make sure I attach a link to this, so if you happen to be in Western Holland and you would like to go visit this. It looks quite interesting. It's quite a pretty museum, so I think it's definitely worth a visit. So in 2021, I'm gonna take a slow ride over there and go check that place out. So it looks quite interesting. So if I finally make it over there, I'll post a link to my normal tuba blog, brassandpipes.com, and I can see some visual pictures of it. So okay. So anyway, back to the instrument that was in the workshop. Like I said, it's a crude piece of shit, but it still had its own charm. The lead pipe had a huge split on the seam, which happens to a lot of these instruments. I suspect it's for many years of the mouthpiece being jammed in and jammed out. At some point it puts a bit of stress on there, and also maybe a bit of corrosion, and at some point it just splits, so it made the instrument unplayable. So we unsoldered the lead pipe, cleaned it out, fixed the seam, gave it a little bit of a cleaning, got the slides working, and voila, you have a nice Dutch-made instrument that works quite well. So okay, so I think that's pretty much it for the podcast. Sorry it's very short. I'm losing my voice already, so I'm gonna call it a day, but just thought I would give you guys a quick podcast on that, and hopefully we'll be back next week with riveting, deep revelations about brass instrument making. So at least more riveting and deep than what you hear right now. So thanks everybody. Stay safe, take care, and have a great week and a great weekend. Yeah, thanks. Bye-bye.